You're listening to WPKN 89.5 FM in Bridgeport and streaming online at WPKN.org.
Reporting and supporting what matters. This is CT Examiner Weekly.
Ned Lamont squared off in a debate against challenger Josh Elliott in the run-up to an August primary that will decide who will be the next Democratic candidate for governor. I'm reporter Luke Feeney with the story.
Since Republican Erin Stewart abandoned her run for governor, the use and misuse of public employee credit cards has been a hot issue in New Britain. Could the next scandal be in your town? I'm reporter LeMaster with the story, this time in Ansonia.
Last year, Connecticut legislators passed sweeping new rules with a goal of building as many as 120,000 new apartments with the first deadline of July 1st. But even advocates of the plan are now saying that first step might be pushed into next year. I'm Eric Obernauer, and I'll have the latest.
From the cooking of Nigeria to dancing like pirates, I'm Robin Breeding with some events from around the state.
And I'm Editor-in-Chief Gregory Stroud, and in the studio joining me this week is Associate Editor Liana Teixeira. Welcome, everyone, to the Roundtable. So, Liana, in a nutshell, what was this week? Is there a word to describe this week in Connecticut news?
This week it is crossroads. The biggest stories all had one thing in common, and that Connecticut is facing some big decisions in the direction it's going, from who could lead the state to how towns are dealing with things like housing and spending issues.
And sometimes literally crossroads in terms of where they put the traffic cameras. I know, again, more stories, more reporting on that. But let's start off with the top line, the biggest story, and I think a pretty rare one for Connecticut, which is a competitive primary. And I think it's fair to say no one is 100% sure who will take the Democratic nomination for governor. So, Luke, you were at the first debate in the primary race. What did you see?
And just for added context, it's the first time in 50 years that the state has seen a sitting governor be primaried. So it really is rare. And what we saw was, in my opinion, two candidates pitching two different ideas of not only their visions for the state, but also who their opponents are.
Are there stakes? If it's Democrat versus Democrat, is there any real difference if Josh Elliott takes the Democratic nomination and goes on to win the governorship, or if Ned Lamont, the incumbent, takes the ring and goes on and gets reelected?
I think in terms of history, I mean, it would be pretty remarkable for Lamont at 72 to serve a third term. But I also think it is part of a larger moment that the Democratic Party has seen, where longstanding incumbents are receiving challenges, and pretty hard challenges, from their left.
So some of it is young versus old. It's a generational change. I mean, we were talking about that, I think, last week. Is we've got we've got an aging delegation in Washington, and a governor 72. It hasn't even really been a story.
Yeah, he's a year older than Lindsey Graham, who died just a few weeks ago, who kind of was the impetus for that story. So Elliott himself said he wasn't trying to make this a generational debate, but it was kind of hard to take that seriously when any chance he got, he would try to connect Lamont to Greenwich, which is the wealthy suburb that he used to serve on and has a house in. He tried to paint the differences between the two as, the legislator accomplished things in spite of Lamont. Lamont pushed back and argued that these were things that he accomplished with a bipartisan collective of legislators, and Elliott was the only one who wasn't there. He accused Elliott of even sleeping through votes.
So if there were one word, I think, from your story, from each candidate, you called Elliott posed as the fighter.
Yes. And
Lamont as the experienced hand.
Yeah, he's been there before. He knows what's going on. Elliott's ideas he described as sort of pie in the sky, which has been something he's called before. I think Elliott focuses on his time in the state legislature. I think he argues he has far more connection to working people. He's from Hamden. Lamont is from Greenwich. Governor Lamont, he argued, just simply isn't. He called him nice. He called him, respectable, but he said he really doesn't meet the moment that we're in right now.
So what do you think are the main issues that separate these two candidates?
The biggest one by far is taxing. That was how the debate opened. The very first question had to do with taxing the wealthiest residents. Elliott, in my opinion, this has been the issue he's tried to create the largest amount of division between him and the governor on. Elliott called for increasing it, while Lamont said that should only be done as a sort of last resort. I also think utility prices. And I will say, I think these speed cameras are going to become a bigger deal as time goes on. And that was another big area they disagreed on as well.
The speed cameras is really interesting because, raising taxes on the rich, especially in a Democratic primary, almost seems like a throwaway line, if you will. But it also seems increasingly that governments at many levels they're always looking for revenue. And the speed cameras could be argued that that's a regressive tax. And in many ways, and you see government do this with all kinds of other fees, and that don't necessarily get the same fanfare as tax rates. I just wonder if what we're seeing in the Democratic primary, and honestly, to some extent, even in the Republican Party in some precincts of the country, is a divide, not even necessarily only ideologically, but between the political class, if you will, and sort of everybody else.
Yeah, and I definitely think we're not only seeing that, I think, in the governor's race, but even in Congress. I think John Larson is facing a hotly contested primary right now, and I think a lot of those ideas are being exercised in that too.
I've talked to some Republicans recently about this primary. So these outside voices, what they're saying. And certainly some of them are saying, we hope Josh Elliott wins because they think he's a beatable candidate. They look at their own candidate, Ryan Fazio, also a Greenwich politician, and they say this guy can beat Elliott. Elliott might not have that, the gravitas or the record, or what can he run on? So that's certainly from the Republican perspective, I'm hearing it's a bit of divide and conquer, or hoping that the candidate they least want wins, and what I'd say sometimes is watch out what you wish for. That was years ago. If we all recall, Democrats were hoping that Donald Trump took the nomination because they said he could never win.
Trump was never an ideological candidate, strictly speaking, though. And I'm not sure that Elliott is either. I think the Republicans might be making a mistake there.
I also think it's interesting that they think that, because Elliott's whole campaign has been centered around attacking Lamont for his connections to wealth in Greenwich. What about Ryan Fazio? I mean, he's from the same area. So I think that's an interesting perspective. I'm not sure how much I agree with it, but that doesn't surprise me either.
Certainly, if there's stakes in the next session, it will be if the stock market remains hot, if the revenues keep coming in, will the guardrails stay in place? And these fiscal guardrails, which were determined on a bipartisan basis when there was more Republican strength in the Senate, those have really been guiding spending. And some people are saying, particularly on the left, are saying, should we be spending more now that we have the money, we have things? We certainly hear that a whole lot from Bridgeport. We need to spend more money in our schools, and that will be something we'll have to look for. But the primary is when, Luke?
Early voting begins August 3rd. The primary is August 11th.
So we'll certainly be back to that soon. But there is another side to the race, or there was, that's played out on the local level, and that's this scandal with Aaron Stewart, the Republican candidate, who has kind of raised questions in towns across Connecticut. And Allie, you were in Ansonia.
Right. So just for context, Aaron Stewart was seen as the front runner to be the Republican gubernatorial candidate in this race. And that quickly changed when an investigation by Crumbie Law Group found that she may have misspent hundreds of thousands of dollars of public money when she was mayor of New Britain.
I think I will go on the record, and I will say, as the editor of CT Examiner, Aaron Stewart did not allegedly misspend public money. Aaron Stewart misspent public money, and she got caught. And part of that was using these city credit cards. But city credit cards are town credit cards. Employees have them in all towns. I mean, we saw this in Fairfield a couple years ago with our reporting that they were taking employees out to lunch and generous lunches and all kinds of fairly lavish spending that they had to walk back there. It didn't turn into a huge scandal because no one was running for governor. But in this case, it blew up. And in Ansonia, what did you see? What kind of spending and how are people responding? Has anyone been forced to pay it back, or is there criminal liability?
So right after the Crumbie Law Group investigation into Aaron Stewart came out, Ansonia announced that they would be hiring Crumbie Law Group to investigate the former mayor of Ansonia, David Cassetti, for his P-card purchase records. And so we got those documents. We got 2 years of his spending records, which showed personal usage. It showed clothing from men's retailer, hair care products, money from Spirit Halloween, laser show displays. So things like that. And so in Ansonia at the time, they had no P-card purchase record. They had no P-card policy. So essentially, we heard from Cassetti's attorney saying, listen, it was a sloppy process, but, there was no criminal wrongdoing here. Every time Cassetti would use his card for a personal matter, staff would alert him and then he would pay it back. They're claiming that there is no restitution and that everything's already been paid back.
So, I mean, this is something we saw with the Connecticut Port Authority years ago, where the basic defense of spending, a lot of spending, and I was hearing from inside sources that said, there was a lavish Christmas dinner at the next table. It was the Port Authority. What were they doing? We had a good year, but it apparently wasn't as good as the Port Authority. And then I talked to the auditors at the time, and they said, if there are no rules, if there are no ethics requirements, there's nothing legally wrong with this spending. So in this case, we might have had lavish spending that the public thinks is wrong, but it isn't actually criminal or civil wrongdoing if there are no rules.
Yeah, and I think that's interesting because some of the purchases that Nick Sambides and I questioned were thousands of dollars in boxing equipment. And stuff like that. And Cassetti's attorney said, Cassetti would, had a boxing club for the youth, or he would throw these lavish city parties, and it was all for taxpayers, for the benefit of taxpayers.
Allie, what amazes me is just especially after the publicity, of course, to the situation with Aaron Stewart and Port Authority, that there are not rules in place that to prohibit this kind of commingling of personal with official city spending on a city credit card.
Right. And the city of Ansonia didn't create a policy on P cards until this March under the new mayor. And then David Cassetti, he was the mayor of Ansonia for 12 years. So at least potentially there's 12 years of spending in that regard.
That's what I was about to ask, is we have another 10 years of spending that could have been made that we don't have answers yet on. What's the plan to learn more about that?
Yeah, so we haven't yet sent in the records requests, but I think it'll be we should do that. But I think also Crumbie Law Group is investigating this. There were some purchases that were never fully explained. Like I believe there was a nearly $7,000 PayPal exchange, and we never really got an idea of what that was. So potentially we'll see it in the outcome of this investigation, and looking for more records and receipts as well.
For listeners out there wondering about their town, how did you do it? And Allie, can you explain how a listener out here could request this information and look themselves?
Yeah, so I think it's a pretty simple process to do. You simply file a Freedom of Information request asking for P-card purchases, and then you probably do the year. So for us, we did 2024 to 2025, and you essentially, like, what we received were who bought what was it charged for, and the amount. So you got a pretty good understanding of what was bought and when.
So these are public records. So
Yes.
You can request them and they have to turn them over.
Correct.
And one more question, Allie, was the mayor or any real leader of any town, are they the only ones that would be using this type of card, or are there more people that could have used it and other records that folks should be looking out for?
So no, it's not just the mayor. I'm not exactly sure town by town who has access to P cards, but at least in Ansonia, we saw a land use coordinator, the finance director, and the police chief. So there's a possibility that in your town, other people have access to the P card as well.
So I think what we have a couple of lessons. One is that you can get these records yourself, but it's not just a question of records, it's a question of rules. And so maybe I'd challenge listeners out there to find out what the rules in their town are for these purchases. Like what ethics rules, what rules are there on spending, because they can't break rules if the rules don't exist. So, and if somebody comes out with something interesting, write us at editor@ctexaminer.com. If you find something interesting, I promise I'll take a harder look. But that's great reporting. I'm sure there will be a whole lot more, Allie, but we're going to have to move on. And I think we're moving on to really what will be one of the biggest stories of the next few years. It's already a big story, and that's housing. We passed a housing bill, a priority housing bill last year in special session in November. And what's happening with that bill? Is it going to be as big of a deal as some are saying, or is it dead on arrival?
Well, it's not dead on arrival, but it's definitely crawling along at a snail's pace. One of the first steps was that towns and cities needed to update their zoning regulations by July, and very few of them have done that and are finding the process to be just more than they have the bandwidth to do. So as a result, they're having to hire expensive consultants to help them along with the process. So, and mind you, none of them have yet filed housing growth plans, which of course goes to the heart of what the legislation was all about.
So part of it is if every single town in Connecticut has to change or should change their local zoning regulations, who's going to do it? And so that you have to hire someone. So in some ways, maybe it's a lawyers, consultants bonanza. I sometimes say Connecticut is the state that consultants, run the state. But they've tried to streamline a little bit about this by using the COGs, as I understand, the councils of government, which replace county government. That what would exist in most states is county government.
The COGs basically are going to take some of the work off the towns for those who want it, but that cities and towns ultimately are still going to approve their own municipal growth plans. They will have say over that. Now, that's going to be done in concert with the COGs, and I imagine if a city or town doesn't approve its plan, that's going to create a whole host of problems. But remember, this was a compromise because home rule is so enshrined in Connecticut.
So I'm curious, when we're talking about the COGs and all the different areas, the COGs generally are a planning group. Is that not fair to say?
That's correct. Yes.
So if they're a planning group and towns are sort of putting themselves in the hands of a planning group, does that planning group or COGs really represent the townspeople, like the voters, or does it more represent a planning kind of agenda?
So let me take this. The head of the COG is an employee of, they're hired by the council, which is populated by top leaders of all the towns. So technically, the head of the COG works for the towns. So how that plays out, and that doesn't mean that all the towns agree. It doesn't mean that some of these planners don't have their own ideas. But I know certainly in Fairfield County, where the head of the COG is Francis Pickering, he's been a vocal proponent of local rule, really, and it's an interesting position for him, because most planners would generally be a bit on the other side and would be more inclined to this state down rule, this idea of planners know best. And Francis Pickering has been a little bit of an outlier and not a quiet one.
Do you think there will be more than not towns that drag this along even further, just given the topic again of home rule and how towns generally like to keep their zoning rules in-house?
Well, I think it's too soon to say, and I know that sounds like a dodge, but the reason I say that is the state first has to come up with its statewide housing production goals, and those are expected in December. Then at that point, it's going to be up to the COGS to, on a regional basis, come up with numbers. That will be next June of next year. So then I think we'll have a better handle on your question. So ask me in a year.
So I think one of the most controversial parts of the housing bill, what Republicans and Democrats fought against, at least initially, they'll always find something to fight against. But one of the big things was those 120,000 units, that goal. And so the new bill doesn't actually have that goal written into the plan. As I recall, basically what we heard from the advocates, the people writing this law, were, we'll put the framework in place, we'll determine the goals later. And that some of that will happen on the regional level, the local level, but ultimately state government is going to have a say in this. And I recall very specifically when asked, are there goals? And we heard, oh, there will be goals.
Yeah, the 120,000 number, the cynic in me wonders if that was a little bit of just a pie in the sky number that was thrown out. But, Greg, and I just want to get back to Liana's question for a moment about might cities and towns try to drag this process out. One thing I think they do have to bear in mind, this was emphasized to me by Francis Pickering, if they do not ultimately come up with housing growth plans, then they will forfeit the ability to obtain what's known as an 830G moratorium, which allows them a 4-year period where they're not exposed to developer lawsuits over affordable housing. So that's definitely an incentive to give them a little kick in the pants to comply.
Certainly one question is, we do have this affordable housing law in place, and this is built on top of it. So there's two different laws. There's the question of whether to plan, why to plan if the other law can just override it. We're hearing a lot of confusion, even from the biggest advocates, of the wording, what the law requires. This is probably going to end up in court, many courts, as we work our way through. Hopefully, we'll see if we might make some progress on actually building some houses, and certainly at a price where people can afford. It's a big story, Eric. We'll be covering this across the state. I appreciate that, and it's always good to check in, frankly, with Francis Pickering. We always wrap up the show with a look at the arts calendar. I think it's the best arts calendar in the state, and Robin Breeding, our arts editor, is in the studio. What do we have?
All right. Well, I'm starting out on August 15th with some cooking classes that are in New Haven at the Q House Kitchen. And that is a place that's run by City Seed. And this is going to be a cooking class that's based on Nigerian cooking. And what the City Seed does is they bring people from the community into the kitchen and they train them as chefs. And these are people from all over the world who are living in New Haven. This particular chef is Oluwabasayu Carolyn Ajidibi. And so she is one of the cohorts from the kitchen, and she will be giving a cooking class. And this is in the Fairhaven neighborhood, and it will be $75.
Certainly, I think I remember our neighbors in Bennington. This was, they were saying the one thing that they miss, Nigerian neighbors, they said it was good fufu. If they could get, every culture has its starch. Nigeria has the cassava based. They have fufu. In China we have rice. In America, I guess we have bread or potatoes. So we'll be expecting some good fufu, some good cooking at this Nigerian Nibbles event. That's August 15th.
Yes, and you can look up all their events at cityseed.com. All right, I'm going to give a plug to Legacy Theater that's in Branford, or Stony Creek, as most of us would call it. And this is a beautiful, beautiful jewel of a theater that was designed by Wyeth Architects from Chester. And they have Broadway people come all summer long. We have concerts going from August 16th with Tony Award winner Beth Lavelle, who was, in Mamma Mia, 42nd Street, and on and on. So, that's coming up August 16th, and you can look up their shows on Legacy Theater.
It's Stony Creek is a great, still funky town along the shoreline. There aren't that many. Maybe Noank is the only other one. But Stony Creek, it's a beautiful theater. It's very high tech. We went in, we actually talked to the architects a few years ago. Great acoustics and a lot of sort of fun shows, I would say, fun, family-friendly shows. This isn't a slow-moving theater. And that will be all summer in Branford, Stony Creek. So what else do you have for us?
Okay. Coming up August 18th at Bank Square Books, which is in Mystic, we have a Merrill Fellow. So she is Corey Van Landingham, and she is going to do some readings and talk about her latest book called Reader Eye. And that book is a series of poems based on Charlotte Bronte's Jane Eyre and the voice of the reader. And so it's a series based on that.
So national level poet. They have a poet residency in Stonington, in the borough. They have a couple of these every year. The latest then will be speaking at Bank Square Books. And that's when?
That is August 18th from 5 to 6 p.m. Alrighty. I like these events. It's The Plot Thickens at Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford. So Cedar Hill Cemetery is a very old cemetery, and they have kind of a great gimmick to get people to come in there. This one is, here are the stories that sound like film scripts. So somebody will go around and, tell you about all the histories of some of the people who, lived and died in these in Hartford, and, a communist spy, a runaway prince. They find sort of really interesting histories to get people involved in the cemetery. And I find that rather interesting.
So they say they bring the dead to life, if you will, in the cemetery. And that's August 19th and Cedar Hill Cemetery in Hartford.
Yes.
And so is there anything else?
All right. One more. We've got Pirates of the Sea, the Fred Astaire Dance Championships at the Hyatt Regency in Greenwich. One reason I really like this is because, believe it or not, my dental hygienist told me about it. She started out learning to dance at a wedding and became one of these people who really got involved in dancing with Fred Astaire groups in these championships. So this is going to be a huge one.
So what does pirate dancing look like?
Well, I believe they have a theme every year. And this year's theme is Pirates of the Sea. So imagine ballroom dancing with kind of a pirate theme.
So think ballroom, but with Johnny Depp as as Jack Sparrow, maybe.
You got it.
Peg legs in Paris. What's not to love?
Exactly.
So that's August 20th to 22nd at the Hyatt Regency in Greenwich.
So that's what we've got going on coming up. I hope you all get out and have fun.
That's about it for this week's episode of CT Examiner Weekly. But before we go, I'd kind of like to hear from staff. What do you think the big story was this week? What did people read more than anything else? What did people care about that we've written?
I'm going to credit myself and say the debate story.
This was a trick question because Editor-in-Chief, it's a story that I worked on, and that was with our reporter in Washington on streamlining. And it was all about how do we get things done? And it's a story that plays out certainly in Eric's reporting. It's the frustration of building housing. There's the frustration of, can we build high-speed rail? Can we build new green energy projects? And how do we do it without destroying the environment? And it's a big debate. It's a bipartisan debate. And it was by far our biggest story, maybe because it was a national story. I think this was a great edition of CT Examiner Weekly, and we will be back next week, as always, because the news is never done.
For more news and events, or if you want to send in comments or story ideas, please go to ctexaminer.com. And if you want to support our mission of keeping Connecticut informed of the news that matters, a subscription is just $20 for the entire year. Reporting and supporting what matters. This has been CT Examiner Weekly. Thanks for listening.